Good afternoon. All right, thank you. Gee whiz. You guys got to give me some energy. We've been on the road for 3 straight weeks doing and hitting every center in the agency, talking about what we're up to from an agency perspective. And we just left Ames this morning and drove over the mountain to come over this way. So it's great to be here. For me, there's a lot of personal interest here. I live in Annapolis, Maryland, for those of you that went to the academy. I have 2 mids that I sponsor. That I left one of them at my place because he's doing Israel for his spring semester. He got snowed in, so I left him there. I just hope it's okay when I get back. It's a dangerous situation. I also thought today was, actually didn't plan this, didn't even think about it from the overall perspective, but from an agency perspective, today's our day of remembrance. This is the time we spend once a year at the agency to recognize the fallen heroes. And some of them came through NPS, obviously. And so today we had a good ceremony at Ames, and the administrator laid a wreath at Arlington Cemetery today as well. It's a time for us to reflect. And when I talk about this journey and the update you're going to hear today, it's going to be really high level, really informal. I want you guys to ask me questions when I get done. I really do. I want it to be that kind of a discussion. If I don't have the answer, Lisa will as we move through this. But I think it's important that you recognize anything that we're doing. You know, we're pretty fortunate to get to stand on the shoulders of some pretty awesome folks, right? I call myself probably the shuttle generation. Is where I cut my teeth coming through as a rocket propulsion test engineer. Did space shuttle main engine testing most of my career. And so that was my time, right? And I worked on a test stand that was built to test the F1 engines for the Saturn V, right? So my bosses were the Apollo guys. And so I stood on their shoulders. And you guys, when you get into this world, if you choose to venture into the NASA side of this world, you'll be standing on our shoulders, right? And the shoulders of the folks that we've lost in this what we really think is just a cool journey that we're on. So it's a little bit, you got that kind of bittersweet piece that goes with today, remembering our friends and remembering that we were part of the reason that we lost them, right? We got to remain curious. We got to remain really vigilant toward what's happening with us. And so you're going to see some stuff here, and it comes out really cool. And if you saw the movie The Martian, right? How many didn't see the movie The Martian? Oh, God. Well, okay, you read the books. That's good. So I don't want to do spoiler alert stuff, but anyway, the movie starts out, right, with everything they need is already there, right? We got a long way to go. As I put it, Matt Damon's growing potatoes in a hab with a Mars ascent vehicle right outside the door, right? We got lettuce. That's what we got on the International Space Station. So anyway, we're pretty fortunate to have what we have, but it's a lot harder than Hollywood makes it look. I still have people that don't work in the agency or don't really pay attention to what we're doing. They'll ask me things like, what are the blue people from Pandora really like, right? Because they think it's real. I mean, they really do. And so it's not, at least I don't think it is. Nobody's told me if it is. But those are the kind of things we're working on. So I'm going to walk through we keep talking about we're on a journey to Mars, and we really are, and I'm going to walk through the phases of that, what we think is important, starting with the present and then moving toward what's going to be next. As Tina said, we have kind of 4 objectives in the agency: aeronautics science, human exploration, and space technology. And I think this particular journey is a good mix of all of them except the aeronautics piece. The aeronautics piece is mostly for terrestrial work around here about what do we do, air traffic management, air traffic safety, aviation safety, next generation aircraft, especially environmentally responsive aircraft. So I'm not ready to talk about that today, but we can talk about it if you want. But this is more how we're integrating the other 3 in terms of getting boots on Mars at some point, right? And so I'm going to walk through it pretty quickly, probably, and then you guys can ask questions. First of all, Zach Moody. Is Zach Moody in here? Zach Moody gets a star today for putting a sign on my parking spot, right? That was pretty awesome. I took a picture of it. I have no influence. It was a good try, though. He says, Zach Moody, astronaut candidate, to vote for him, 2017. That was awesome when I pulled up. I took a picture. I'm going to send it to Dr. Ellen Ochoa, who's also an astronaut, but also the head of Johnson Space Center, and say, this is pretty awesome. So anyway, we do have a call out right now. It's open to have the next selection of astronauts. And hopefully these will be the astronauts that are dealing with what we're going to talk about here. So we call this kind of our Kraken chart because as you come off the Earth here, you see all these big arms and legs. This is kind of how we're trying to do this. It's a series of missions, a series of developments, a series of systems that we need to build that we think get us from what we call Earth Reliant stage here at the bottom all the way to Earth Independent. And really for us, the area around the moon, cislunar space, that area is going to be what we call our proving ground. And so we've got a series of missions planned for that area. We're going to develop the systems to do this. And it's all really related to kind of an incremental stepping stone approach to move out and move further out. Because once we commit to going to Mars, we're kind of committed, right? We're 2 or 3 years away. You can't just turn around and come back. So we need those systems to be good. We need them to be proven out well. And we think we can do that getting out of low Earth orbit, which is what we call the Earth Reliant phase. And I'll talk about each one of those and what our objectives are in each one and how we're moving forward from that standpoint. But it is a combination of our science, our exploration, and our technology. We're already on Mars, right? We're on Mars today. Cool thing we saw yesterday at the Jet Propulsion Lab was they're working on some virtual reality stuff with all the imagery we've gotten back from Mars already. 3 of us were standing there with our VR glasses on, and we were looking at the rover and looking at the wheels from different views. And so, as I said, I went to Mars yesterday. So it's kind of cool, right? You can do that. But we really want to get real people there on the ground. So this is kind of the path. You know, you got the space station, space launch system, orbiters, landers. Coming from this end, we've got the commercial industry that we're really, SpaceX. The Boeing folks are really trying to pull orbital ATK, or trying to provide us the cargo and the crew to low Earth orbit so that we're launching Americans from our soil, not necessarily just from Russia, and have a mix from that standpoint. We'll use the Orion crew module to do that. Solar electric propulsion is an area we think really becomes because of what we've done with the solar array technology. We think we can really get a gain and a boost and allow that to actually pre-position stuff at Mars that we can use when we get there. So we've got some technology development to do there. The actual technology around electric propulsion is not new. I mean, we've been doing that for a long time. It's just the efficiency of it. Can you get it where it's efficient enough for us to move forward? And then what we'll do in transfer orbit. So I'm going to walk through that. If you think about it, we're like any government organization. We have strategic objectives, strategic plans. We've got to put them together. This is actually a 2-scale view of an astronaut on Phobos next to Mars. So that kind of gives you what it would look like if you were on Phobos looking at the Martian surface. Phobos is kind of an interesting target if we ever, again, we haven't picked it exactly yet or picked where we're going, but I don't have the gravity well that I have to deal with if I go to Mars, right? And I get tremendous radiation protection from Mars itself to come here. And a lot of our planetary scientists believe the surface of Phobos is very similar geologically to the surface of Mars because of the way that it all went together. So there's some interesting thoughts about maybe going there first. We'll see. You could also telerobotically operate things on Mars from Phobos and protect the crew better. All those kind of things come into play. Lots of options, y'all. Lots of options. But our big objective is to expand human presence into the solar system and ultimately to the surface of Mars and to advance all the things that we want to advance for this country and really internationally. So what are kind of the basic principles, right? Well, this is the stuff they don't talk about in The Martian, right? We got to do this in the budget and within the buying power that the U.S. government provides us, right? Or we got to find international and commercial partners to deal with. Academia comes into play here. Where can we actually assign that kind of work from that standpoint? So, and we can't expect a big influx of dollars, right? We got to do this within the means of this country. We have to. It goes both ways. It's not. A lot of times you'll hear the or word when you talk leadership. This is one of those leadership things. A lot of people want to use or. Throw and in there. This has got to be science and exploration. It can't be science or exploration. It can't be human or robotic. It's going to be human and robotic as we move forward. It's part of the principles. The TRL, technology readiness levels, that we talk about, as the technology progresses, I don't know if y'all are familiar with that phrase, but as the technology progresses, it usually gets to what we call TRL 6. And from 6, that where it's just about ready for somebody to take and actually use, and goes to TRL 7. That little area is called the Valley of Death, because the programs will not pick it up because they don't want to take the risk, and the developers don't have the dollars to take it over the hump to make them say, I have used it and it's good to go. That's a big challenge for us in the agency, mainly because the risk posture we take sometimes is so averse, right? That taking on a new technology and saying it's going to come through for us, that's it's hard to do that. But that's something we've got to work on, and that's why we formed a Space Technology Mission Directorate that we're using in the agency to develop those technologies. So when you look at the near-term opportunities, we're really trying to do, our agency's famous for doing what I call one-offs. You do it, you've done it, you move on to something else. And what we're really trying to focus on is that every mission we do has something extensible to the next mission, right? And all of it has to be to this final goal of getting to Mars. That's what we're trying to do. That's not normal necessarily for us, but when we do the Asteroid Redirect mission that I talk about here in a minute, the Asteroid Redirect mission is kind of the, I don't want to say afterthought, but it's not the main reason we're doing it is we want to prove solar electric propulsion. We want to prove that we can capture things on orbit, do on-orbit capture of things. The mechanisms that we want to prove we can crawl out of the Orion spacecraft and actually harvest stuff from the asteroid that we bring back. All those kind of things are important for us as we take the next steps. So it's not just about going and getting an asteroid and bring it back. We want to actually, we've had great success, frankly, in energizing the commercial industry base in this country with SpaceX, Orbital ATK, and from a contracting and a budget perspective for us, it's been very good for us. So we want to continue to energize that and bring it on. Again, you got to have this evolvable infrastructure up through space that we've got to work on to keep it there, so that we don't have this. We can afford, in the agency, we can usually afford one big development at a time, right? And so that's how we look at it. Let's get this one done, and then let's move on to the next one. Because at some point we got to build a habitat that the crew can ride into Mars. Well, we're not working on that now, but also have to get the habitat to orbit. So that's why we're building this big space launch system, right? So we got to kind of that order and that sequence comes into play. And you can see that the same kind of capabilities we want to own within the agency that we can use throughout time. They're enduring capabilities that the agency will actually need. So clearly international partners will play into this. We're spending a lot of time with the partners saying, okay, what part do you want in this? You know, what skills are you going to bring? Because what you'll find is the International Space Station, which has just celebrated 15 years of having folks on it for 15 years. That's a pretty cool program in terms of the international cooperation and what's happened. It was all about bartering. It's a complete barter program. The way we structure that, the U.S. provides this, Europe provides this, Russians provide this, Japanese provide this, whatever it is, right? They all provide it, and sometimes we got some of the multi-program logistics modules that we used back up and forth from the space station were built by a company in Italy. Well, the Italian government paid for that, right? But they paid for it, and what did they want in return? They wanted a crew member on the station for 6 months. And that's what they got. So, I mean, that's the kind of bartering that went on as we move forward. So it's pretty neat. So that's the kind of stuff we want to take advantage of that we've used so far. This is kind of I'd call it our pioneering approach. And there's a couple options in here, as you can see. It's kind of our trade space. Across the board, we want solar electric propulsion. We need in-situ resource utilization, or ISRU. That's a lovely acronym we use. That's basically using what you got when you get there. How can we use the environment we're in to do that? We got to have a series of robotic precursors. Right now, one of the challenges for us is in the decade of the 2020s, we don't have anything going to Mars. There's nothing on our books going to Mars, right? So what kind of precursors can we do that could enable humans to go? What do we need to know? What do we need to learn? Radiation levels, all those kind of things. We actually have a radiation monitor on Curiosity, which is on Mars now, providing back that kind of data for us so we'll know what we're putting humans in when we get there. Again, the human robotic interactions is a big one. Who are our partners that we're going to coordinate with? And then what are the science activities that come along that are synergistic? Not we're doing science, we're doing humans, right, from that standpoint. So we got some trades that we can do depending on what you look at and depending on the extensibility piece of this. There's actually a pretty interesting set of trades in terms of departing from Mars from cislunar space when you look at some of the orbital mechanics around this and what you can do. So if we can get to cislunar space and kind of develop a presence there, that may become our jumping off point to get to head to Mars, right? So you got that's a thought, right? That's something we're working on, all really based on the trajectories and the kind of things we'd go do. The vicinity, what do we do when we get to the Mars vicinity then? Same set of trades, really. Do we go down to the surface? Do we send cargo early? Do we send, how do we do this? There's a lot of trades that we're playing with, and we'll look at them as we go forward. One of our biggest challenges, probably, if not the biggest challenge for Mars, is entry, descent, and landing. When we landed Curiosity is about a 1-ton lander, the Mini Cooper as we called it, right? Well, we stretched every bit of our entry, descent, and landing technology we had to land that there, right? And we have a pretty large, and really we're the only ones right now that really care about entry, descent, and landing from our perspective in terms of that kind of stuff. Martian environment is interesting because the atmosphere is thinner. We're going just as fast as we come back to Earth, so the atmosphere doesn't slow us down enough, right? You come to Earth, the atmosphere slows you down, right? Come through Mars, it slows you down, but not enough. So we've got a lot of technologies we're working on around that. And you're talking about landing 25 to 30 metric tons as opposed to 1. So supersonic retropropulsion is a big deal for us. Inflatable decelerators, as we call them, are a big deal, right? Things you can pop out that you let burn off, but as they burn off, they take the energy out. That's a big challenge for us and a big area that we got to work on. So the point is you got multiple ways to get there, and we just got to figure out which one it's going to be. But what's cool about this is the systems needed to do this are all about the same, right? It's just a matter of where we use them and how we use them as we move forward. So we got a lot of different ways we can do this as we move forward. So there's several. This is kind of where we are versus where we're heading, and in the legend here, in our vernacular in the agency, we have these 3 boxes. They actually represent 3 mission directorates, right? So they're kind of separate. They get their funding separately from Congress. Everything's separate. So our goal is to try to make sure they're still working on the same kind of stuff. It sounds really easy, but it's kind of a pain. When Congress gets in the middle of it and tells us what to do, how to do it, that gets interesting some days. But today we've got, if you start at the bottom, kind of work your way up. We've been on Mars for a long time from a scientific perspective, which is pretty exciting. Maven is there now working on the volatiles in the atmosphere, which is another thing we want to understand. And of course we've got Curiosity there. The next mission is Mars 2020. That's the next rover. Basically, it's like a Curiosity, but we're going to have different instruments on it. Instruments we think we need to move forward. ISS, of course, is our kind of our crown jewel right now for human exploration. Using that mostly to understand long duration impacts. We've got Mark Kelly up there right now. He's coming up almost on his year here I think in about a month and a half, which is pretty awesome, right? And Mark's just Scott Kelly.
They look alike.
Yeah, I know. Just a little, just a little. I knew that sounded funny. Anyway, but Scott's coming home, and of course we call it the twin study because Mark is his twin. For those of you that don't know that. And Mark's here on Earth, and we're doing a lot of interesting physiological stuff here. The longest duration we've had is 6 months, right? That's the typical increment for a crew member. So we kind of know what happens after 6 months to most folks, the things that happens to the human body. The question is, does that kind of keep going in a trend? Does it drop off? Does it stay the same? Does it get worse? Is there another step in there that we got to deal with things? And there's things like there's just a lot of different issues that we've got to deal with as we move forward. So Station, we've got a beautiful human research program planned, but Station has a finite life, right? We're right now 2024 is as long as we're planning on using Station. We could go from an engineering perspective, the capability Station, we go to 28, but with that comes opportunity cost, right? Because to keep it crewed, keep the cargo, keep everything on there. We're talking $3 billion a year. Of our $18 billion or $19 billion we got. So it's a pretty expensive option, but it does knock down a lot of risk for the next pieces. And that's that balance we have to strike, and we have to understand when we're going to do that. Building the Space Launch System, which is the next rocket that we're building, it's a huge thing. Lisa and I were at Michoud Assembly Facility, which is down just outside of New Orleans here last week, and just the hydrogen tank for this rocket is larger than the external tank for the shuttle. And then we're going to throw a LOX tank on top of that. And I think somebody told me we have like 10 feet to get out of the VAB at Kennedy Space Center, right? So the VAB was almost the limiting factor, right? And if you've ever seen the vehicle assembly building down at Kennedy, that's amazing. I mean, it has its own weather, right? There's clouds that go through the VAB at times. So, but we're making great progress on this, and the first launch is scheduled for November 2018, right? And so the engines are going to be Space Shuttle main engines. We call them RS-25Es now. I'm an engine guy. I'll always call them Space Shuttle main engines. And we're actually using the ones we had left over from Shuttle. We had 16 flight units that we can use, so that gives us a push. And we're starting to develop those engines using additive manufacturing, because we're going to throw them away. So how can we actually make them cheaper? Because they're probably the most advanced technology from a liquid engine perspective. That and the RD-180 the Russians make, probably the most advanced chemical propulsion engines we've got. So we're working on that, making great progress. Orion, we just saw the crew module, the structural backbone for the crew module at Michoud also being built. Totally different assembly process than we've used in the past, pretty awesome. That's the one for EM1 is just leaving Michoud here in a couple of weeks to go down to Kennedy to start getting outfitted for its flight. So pretty exciting there. Asteroid Redirect mission, this is our first real, this overall thing I call a mission is the big M, capital M, right? And so as I look at that, for me, there'll be a lot of little M's, and this is a little M, the Asteroid Redirect mission. It allows us to go, we're going to go to a very large asteroid. We've got a couple identified right now. You got to catch one that's kind of coming toward us, not going away. That's a problem. And what we want to do is we want to go to the larger asteroid. Every asteroid that we've actually characterized now, you can see boulder fields on them, right? And we want to go get one of those boulders off of there. We're going to have the sensors on this mission that says that's what's a good scientifically important boulder. Pull that boulder off. We're going to bring it back to what we call a distant retrograde orbit around the moon, which is a very stable orbit actually. And then we'll send the crew there to interact with it, bring back pieces from it, pieces that won't have had to deal with the coming through the atmosphere of Earth, right? The things that we see when we get them off the ground now. So it's actually pretty exciting, and it proves out our solar electric propulsion capability, which is a big deal for us, and some of the same techniques we would use for satellite servicing, human robotic kind of activities that you can do as you move forward. Mars precursors, this is probably our next thing. As I said, we don't really have anything in the 2020s after Mars 2020. And so what do we need to be doing? And so we're starting to identify those kind of missions we can do out in the Mars time. The habitat is an interesting one. When you start putting in the requirements for what do you need a habitat to go to Mars, your first thing is 1,000 days, right? These are the kind of things you have to put out there. Well, our life support systems now that we use on the station, especially things like urine processing and water processing, they haven't proven to be, they certainly aren't 1,000 days reliable. And the crew spends a lot of time with the parts. So do I take all the parts with me? What are the kind of logistics trail that we're going to have to deal with? This is almost, when you start talking about going to Mars, this becomes a logistics discussion as much as it does a technical discussion. We took a 3D printer up to the International Space Station here, and we're starting to make parts on orbit, right? So can you take a 3D printer, take the materials, and then make your own parts as you go forward based on what it is? So those are the kind of stuff we'd like to do in this arena, but also do it on the station as well. So that HAB is going to have to be able to do it. It's one of the most, I left the Martian a little depressed, right? Because they had all these systems already built. And I'm like, crap, we got a lot to do. And you kind of look at them and you go, geez, because I know how hard those things are to put together. I went to there's a centrifuge in on this beautiful thing they call the Hermes that goes back and forth from Mars. Again, really hard to build. Looks really good in Hollywood though. And so somebody comes up to me after I gave a similar talk to this before and said, you just got to put one of those centrifuges on there. And I said, well, we're not going to make 2035 if we need that the first time we go. So it's also a phasing. It's not just what we do, but when we do it, right? To see what we got to do. And then you see the first human Mars missions. They could be orbiting. We could do an Apollo 8 kind of trip where we just go to Mars and come back. That could be a start. We could go to Phobos. There's a lot of options there depending on where we are financially and what programs we got to develop. So here's kind of some of the things. Now, I don't want anybody yelling at me, right, when I say what we've learned. I'm just saying we've been working on these. We're still learning on every category here, but the things that we've got to go do. So you talk about, these are kind of what I call 3 of our biggies that we talk about. Orbital environment and operations. We've done a lot of this, right? We've done a lot of this already, so we have some knowledge in these areas. These are the areas that we really got to work on, right? That we want to focus our technologies on. Same with EDL. I talked about EDL already. I mean, I have to say them again. You're watching that movie, and I went with people that don't know NASA, right? My wife invited like all our neighbors. And I mean, I love working for NASA, but some days when you have to say why we hadn't done that yet to people, why aren't you there already? Anyway, this Mars Ascent vehicle sitting right outside just sitting there, and it's generating propellant, from the, that's hard. We got a lot of work to do to get there. But it's not impossible. It's just things that we got to go work on. And then, of course, the operations at Mars, you know, just as an example, one of my favorites is dust, right? The wind blows, they have these storms. What kind of power? If you're going to depend on solar power, then you better have some way of cleaning off your reflectors, right? If you can't get out there. So there's a lot to do. Radiation is another big one we got to deal with as we move forward. That gives you some nice single event upsets occasionally that you deal with. So these are this is just an example of 3 areas and what we got. We got roadmaps like this for all these things. So just a real quick, so when you talk about Earth Reliant, this is what we're doing with the International Space Station. We want a long duration systems. Can they work? We're going to start injecting delays into the comm. We've been playing this for a while where Houston and station have a delay when they talk to simulate what it would be like between Mars. Because frankly, going to Mars, we're not going to have time to call back to Houston and say, hey, you know, it's just not going to work that way. As Lisa and I, we were both at the Curiosity landing when JPL was there, and you're sitting there all tense, right? Well, it had already happened. Whatever happened, it happened. And you're sitting there going, that was like 7 minutes ago, right? What happened? Oh, and you're waiting for that first signal back. That's the kind of delay we have to deal with. Now, we're working on optical comm that we hope not only will make the pipe larger, but it'll give us it'll help us with the timing as well. Still, not easy. I talked about the human health piece. And then, again, enabling an industry here in this country to provide us the crew and cargo. Kind of the proving ground objectives. So we put them in some categories of working in space, staying healthy, and then the transportation piece. And you can kind of see ISRU, In Situ Deep Space Hab. I've talked about all these already, but just gives you an idea of the kind of things we'd like to do in the proving ground. The reason we like the proving ground is because you're you know, depending on where you are in the orbit and the mechanics, you know, you're 3 to 5 days away from home. So something goes wrong, you can get people home, right? We want to have those systems proven out before we send people on a journey to Mars where you're 2 to 3 years from home, right? And so that's the kind of stuff we're working on to help those. And then this is kind of our precursor discussion. Again, what kind of issues do we need to give us the confidence that we know what we're getting into when we get there, the environment we're going to be walking into. And clearly we're going to have to work with the decadal plans that the science folks have, bring the technology in, a lot of technology that needs to be done, and then somehow make it where it's sustainable. We don't want to do, I mean, we're pushing to not do it like a touch and go, right? We don't want to go and that's it, we're done, we did it, we walk away. We want to make a sustainable presence there. So just to summarize, and then I'll let you guys jump into questions and pound me with whether this is good, bad, indifferent as we move forward. It just requires a very resilient architecture. Resiliency is a word I know the DoD's using it. That's the new word. Affordability was it like 3 years ago. Now it's resiliency. It is important to have an architecture that can move across multiple administrations. This is a very long-term activity, right? We figured it out recently that stations survived something like 5 presidents, but if you look at the international involvement, it was something 36 different changes of heads of state, right, over the course of the time for it to build and where it is now. And that means each country has to maintain their commitment for us to be able to do what we're trying to do. So this is the same kind of thing we're going to run into, you know, and for us, you know, you can get reset with a new administration. That'll be kind of interesting. We got one coming up. Our goal is to say we got a good plan, leave us alone. That won't work. We already know. I mean, that's a nice plan. But anyway, so we're working through that. But we do think that we've got a pretty decent plan. There's several options for us in cislunar space for the next 10 years for what we're going to do around the moon. If our friends from Europe, the Europeans would like to go to the surface of the moon, right? They would like to do that. They would like to build habs at the moon, and we're like, great. We'll give you our part of that deal. We got a rocket. You don't need to build a better rocket. We can provide your capability there, and we'll go with you. But we're not going to lead that effort because we want to lead the effort to go to Mars, right? And that's the kind of way we're thinking. So it's not that's just the way it works. So that's what we're doing. I think you know, that's the exploration journey. You know, Tina talked about leadership around this. Lisa and I talk about this all the time. It's you know, it's all about our people. When you're trying to take something like this on, your people have to come first, you know, and because your people will take care of you if you take care of them. And the key is to keep them energized and excited about this, and we've talked about this at every site we've been to in the last 3 weeks, and even before that. It's not like we just did this last 3 weeks. Our teams are energized around this. Our commercial folks are ready to do this. Our folks that are working on this stuff, I saw them 3 years ago when we put the shuttle down. You know, or, well, how longer than that? I guess 4.5 years ago when we stopped flying shuttle and we canceled Constellation, which was our next piece. I saw some teams really, I mean, I thought we'd lost them. And now I see those same people, and they're just super energized and super engaged in what they're doing and excited to share with you what we're trying to do. So that to me is a measure. It's a soft measure, I admit it, but people are pushing, and so we'll see if we can fly in 2018. We'll get there, but you know, leadership to me is about our people. You got to have a sense of humor, right? Because this crap will drive you crazy, especially in the political arena that comes around this. You got to have a passion for this. You got to want to do this because it is hard, right? And those to me, and you got to listen. As a leader, you got to be listening to your folks because your folks will tell you when you're crazy, right? And I think that's really important on a day like this when we're talking about a day of remembrance, right? We have to listen. You got to pay attention. You got to remain curious. You got to remain hungry for the issues that are coming up because there's going to be lots of issues as we move forward for this. But you know, as Charlie Bolden says, our administrator, it's one of my favorite lines he uses. We're not a history agency. We're a future agency because everybody wants to talk about what we did. He wants to talk about what we're going to do, right? And so that's what we're trying to do. So that's what I had for you, and I figured we'd take some time to take questions. Yes, sir.
As private industries, they're creating these rockets. Eventually, they want to put a human in them, I'm sure. Is that something where there's a partnership between NASA and that private industry where they're going to use NASA's astronauts to fly them in, and then if so, then they have to meet all your requirements, I guess?
Yeah, we have a current set of contracts called the Commercial Crew Program, scheduled to fly in 2017, late 2017, maybe 2018. The two folks in that are Boeing, has their capsule called the CST-100 Starliner, I think is what they call it now, and it's going to fly on top of an Atlas launch vehicle. SpaceX has their Dragon, or what they call the Dragon, the human-rated Dragon. They already have a Dragon, but the human-rated Dragon, which will fly on top of their Falcon. And we did that totally differently than we've ever done a competition before. It's actually fixed price contracts, which is bizarre for us because we usually do cost plus award fee because it's a development activity, right? And so this is causing us some challenges. In those contracts, though, they have our human rating requirements. They have the same requirements. And so the challenge with us in that environment is we're pretty specific on our requirements, and so specific that you can, at times, the requirements probably came from scar tissue that we've earned over a lot of time, right? And so you put those kind of requirements in. But what it also can do is it can also inhibit innovation, where people have a different way to accomplish the same requirement. And so that's been a challenge. Our engineering and safety communities have to review all their what we call FEMA SILs and hazard reports and how they're going to deal with those requirements. And you get some interesting differences of opinion, you know, on satisfying these requirements that we think are really black and white. But what I've learned is you know, when you write it down, that's black and white, but it's really gray, right? Really gray. But yeah, we have that in place right now, and it's actually one of the tenets of this whole process is if we can get commercial crew launches from American soil, we bring that back to this country. We'll always be partners with the Russians in terms of this right now, but if you guys are paying any attention to that political side of the world, you never know. I mean, we had the Atlas vehicle flies the RD-180s, which is a Russian engine, and just this week, you know, he's already been on a rampage, but just this week, Senator McCain pretty much trying to stop us from using those engines, which takes a pretty awesome launch vehicle out of our mix. But we should be able to build our own launch vehicle from that. It's his argument. So, but that's what we're trying to do is enable the commercial industry to do that. But we do have that debate. We do have that debate pretty constantly So but the crews will be a mix of their crews. The companies will have their crews and our crews. But if they fly our astronauts, they'll meet our requirements, and we'll certify that before they go.
I was wondering, where are we at currently with exploration of water flows and any microscopic life possibly on Mars?
On Mars? Well, clearly, if you've seen the results that have come back from the reconnaissance orbiter we have and the Curiosity that's there now, we're seeing tremendous indications that there was water there. We don't know if it's below the surface yet. We just don't know where it is, but there was clearly flows of water at some point. On the rover we have coming up, we're actually, it has a requirement to cache samples, which is basically this little, I don't know, it looks like a Gatling gun, right? We're going to take a bunch of samples and we're going to put them in to this thing, and somewhere we will pick them up or get them off the surface of Mars and get them home, right? So it's called a Mars sample return. That's one of the largest science objectives that's out there in the world of, in the scientific world. So until we get that back, we won't know what the volatiles and the inorganics are in there. They've got, but we're taking some samples through one of the instruments on Curiosity now that's given us these indications that we're pretty confident in. But then the question is, where did it go? Is it just below the surface? What's happening from that standpoint? So that's some of the experiments we're trying to do on the next rover. There's a huge debate. I mean, you hear it all the time, is could you just send a human, right? And would that be actually easier than, because if you look at Curiosity, it's a great rover and all the rovers are great, but even Steve Squires has said, wow, an astronaut could have done that in a couple weeks, right? Just especially one that's trained to go get those kind of samples. We have a pretty interesting protocol on planetary protection that actually is an interesting, and I don't mean planetary defense, I mean protection, where we're not, it's an international treaty that sets what we take there so that we don't contaminate Mars, right? But also so that when we bring something home, we don't get a false positive that we pick stuff up. So the teams are working really hard on that. That's actually one of the biggest challenges we have with this caching system, is how do you have it so clean that you know if you get something, if we ever get something back and we go, oh, look, there's life, it wasn't something we brought with us in the system, right? Fingerprints, thumbprints. I mean, it's a pretty interesting situation. So that's going to be our challenge. But the scientific data is pointing for sure that there was water there. We want that proof, and that's why we want to go there. That's the main reason. Yes, sir.
Sir, I was reading a critique of the DoD's Joint Strike Fighter program with a cost of like $1.3 trillion, and the author compared that to the entire cost of the Apollo program, which is about $180 billion. So this points out the kind of the inequity and level of how how funds are allocated. You mentioned that this may be a multi-administration sort of program, and the need to keep kind of the program sold and keep it going. So what is your strategy for keeping the administration sold and keep a level of funding on this?
That's a great question. There's a lot of strategies. You want to answer? No, I'm just kidding. Well, so first of all, in my role, I have a pseudo designation as a COO, right, for the agency. So I do most of the business programmatic discussions around that kind of issue, and we have a pretty interesting programmatic process that we've destroyed many times, right? I mean, we have been incredibly successful for the last 10 years because we've been bringing practices in from DoD, bringing in the best practices to try to manage our programs and be honest about what it is, right? But you got to balance that with telling somebody how much it's actually going to cost for 30 years, you know. And so what we're finding in the political environment is it's all about this year, not about that long-term vision. We've been pretty successful in maintaining. If you look at the International Space Station, again, it survived by one vote in 1994. I think it was 94 or 92. One of those years, it was one vote away from being canceled. And now it's up there as this incredible laboratory that we're using to do all this. But that's the tentative nature of these long-term programs that we're on. For us, what we're doing is what we want to do when the administration comes in, the new administration, whoever they are, is we want to present to them, this is where we're going, here are the kind of accomplishments that are going to happen on your watch, if you will let us, and here's how we're controlling the costs around these programs. Here's the methodologies we use. That's all I can do. NASA is on the GAO, Government Accountability Office. We are on the high-risk list. I get a nice invitation every 2 years to go testify in front of that committee, who yells at me from our inability to control cost and all the things that happen. I kind of say I hope we're on the high-risk list because we're doing the kind of missions that should be on the high-risk list, but that's okay, they don't care. But I will be on that list, right, until I can, but they really mean programmatically, right? We got a program like this, James Webb Space Telescope, which is going to be this remarkable, just absolutely remarkable observatory that we're going to put up in 2018. In 2010, we had to rebaseline that, right? That was predicted to be a $3 billion program, and we got capped at $8 billion after we rebaseline, right? Well, I can't do that anymore. The fiscal environment, that's the kind of stuff that gets me killed. In the year 2000, we gave the Bush administration, when they came in, we gave them a nice $4 billion International Space Station problem, right? Well, that went, fortunately, we kept the program, but you could see where I don't want that problem to be mine if you're a new administration. So our goal is to try to make sure we're as up as we can be programmatically and not bringing bad news to the next administration. And we'll do that again, you know, until we get there, because this is 20, 25 years of building up each time. And sometimes we see it all the time. We see it in a lot of our missions that a great idea this year all of a sudden wasn't a good idea next year, and so that money that you spent, you get kind of frustrated. But that's the environment we're in. But that's the way we're going to try to do it, is say, here's the plan we're on, here's the things we're going to do, and we're going to. My goal, it's probably naive. Okay, I wasn't in my position during the last presidential transition. I was out in the colonies, not in D.C., and so I didn't see it as much as we're seeing it now. My plan is to try to tell our story in whoever wins language, right? So what? So and if I end up at Mars at the end of that, cool, right? But if sometimes we're too myopic in our view, we'll say we're going to the moon. I don't care what, we're going to the moon. And so the candidates don't ever NASA is 0.4 of 1% of the total U.S. government budget, right? It's a good budget. I'm not complaining. That was not a complaint, since I'm being recorded. It's a good budget, right? So but we're never going to be a political swinger, right, from that standpoint. So in my mind, right, I just have to show a plan, show that we can perform to that plan. And that's the only thing I can do, the only thing I can control from that perspective. And again, you know, they campaign on jobs, economic growth, technology infusion. I mean, I'm making stuff up, but that's the kind of things you hear. Why can't I tell that story? You know, I think I heard Donald Trump tweeted, I don't want to go to Mars, I need to fix potholes. What I got to do is show him how going to Mars is going to fix potholes, right? And I think I can do that, maybe. Certainly try. Yes, sir.
You get a fight from people about unmanned systems and autonomy for vis-a-vis humans. So at this point, it sounds like you've already answered it, because humans can do more. You know, at least.
Oh, yeah.
Present, but in the future,
yeah, I think one of the this is a great leadership lesson in my mind, because Lisa hears this all the time from me. This is a great example of we fall into the tyranny of or instead of the power of and. If you ever get into a situation where people are boxing you into a corner, reporters love to do this to me all the time when I'm in press conferences, is are you going to do this or that, right? And I go, take the word or out and put in the word and. Totally changes the way you look at a situation, right? It's going to take both. In fact, one of our gaps in the agency that we're working on, technical capabilities, we're doing a pretty large effort on technical capabilities. What does NASA really need? What's available in academia? What's available in the commercial industry? We hold on to stuff, right? Because we get worried it's not going to be there. But some of it is really commoditized at this point, and I don't need to be doing it. An example of a decision we just made. We got people working on lithium-ion batteries, right? No, I can do that out. I can get that from industry much cheaper, so stop doing that. But one of the gaps we found was this autonomous intelligent systems, right? How does that play because it's all the way from a hardware solution to a software solution, and I got people playing in all sorts of areas around that. And it's an enabler. It's not a or, it's an enabler as we move forward, because if you can get to a truly autonomous system, and there's many definitions around that, as I'm sure you know, you can help so much, right? If you can get predictive and have that feedback in where the system can take care of itself, it really is an enabler from an affordability perspective in a big way. So that's one of the areas we're really focusing on probably in the next 4 years, is how do we coalesce the whole agency, because everybody's got good ideas in that area, but we're all over the map. We're not aligned, and we're trying to get people to align to these. How would that help this? But I don't see it as a argument one way or the other. I see it as an and. I really do, and I think we got our folks are thinking that way too. The guys that are working with, we got some guys at Ames working with Google cars. Google and Nissan have the autonomous cars. So you go, why are y'all working with those? Well, they have already shown where the algorithms are directly applicable with UAVs, right? What we do in national airspace, and then they can actually show you where it steps right into what we could do in space, autonomous activities in space. So we think a lot to learn there. It's funny, that's one of the areas where you know, in the 60s, I really feel like NASA led the technological revolution, right? And really that whole process injected a lot. You look at the increase in engineering schools, how many people went to school for engineering. We're actually now pulling from industry, and they're helping us with some of the things we need to do, right? They're advancing sometimes a lot faster than we are. And our teams are not shy about partnering, as we say, with those guys. So, but it is a big area for us, actually. We saw a great demonstration of it today at Ames, some of the stuff they're doing in that area. Pretty neat. With you know, totally different topic than this, but I mean, you talk about what Amazon and all these guys want to do about delivering mail or delivering packages, right? That's a complex problem. It's a huge problem when you think about the airspace and where that can all go. And the guys at Ames are leading what the federal government's doing from that from traffic management of that particular area. And almost all that's dead applicable to what we would be doing on orbit in space. So hopefully we won't have that kind of traffic in space.
How much do you estimate that the Mars program would cost? And if you had unlimited funds, what's the earliest that you could put on Mars?
The way I've been talking about this is that our human exploration program today, right, the part that Mr. Bill Gerstenmaier runs for us in the agency, is roughly $8 billion a year, 8 to 9 billion, depending on how it goes. So for me, the way I look at it is, if you took that money and you say we're going to try to be in the Mars vicinity in the 2035 timeframe, that's 20 years. So you multiply the 8 billion times 20, that tells me I got $160 billion between now and then, which is a pretty good chunk of change, right? But if I walk in and say I need $160 billion to go to Mars, I'll get thrown out, right? So that's why but of that 8 billion, it's all got to be aligned, it's all got to be focused, and it's all got to be pushing toward this same area. Space technology is another 500 million a year, again, over 20 years. You know, it's roughly 10 more billion you're throwing into the mix, as long as it's aligned and not working on other things. So we don't have a price for that. We just got to make a cadence of missions that's aligned using the resources that we got. As far as accelerating, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't have any idea. I really wouldn't. I've seen we've got a chart we've been using with what the Apollo dollars were in this year's dollars, and NASA gets roughly 19 billion a year, and 16 is what we got. If you normalize that back, use $15 to Apollo, they were getting roughly 60 billion a year. So they were 4% of the national budget during the Apollo days, and we're 0.4 now.
To leave Earth's orbit and actually get to Mars, are you guys leaning more towards chemical rockets? Or,
Yeah.
like
Yes. Well, it's chemical for humans, and what we actually think in our split mission scenario right now, what we're leaning toward is it'd be chemical for humans, but we pre-place using electric propulsion right now. Nuclear is still kind of it's back there as something that we'd like to do, but there's so many other things that come with nuclear launches, nuclear propulsion. There's a lot of other stuff. So the chemical propulsion would be able to get us there as fast as possible. That'd be our goal, so that the humans aren't exposed to the radiation environment that they'd be exposed to, as long as the crew wouldn't be exposed so long. But we can send cargo and pre-place it. That's kind of the way we're looking for it, and the solar electric propulsion that we did, the efficiencies we've gained from the arrays, the amount of power we're able to put through there, is actually it actually went past the tipping point where that actually becomes a pretty good option for us, from a better option than others. Solar electric propulsion used to not be as efficient, but these arrays are actually helping us. Yes, sir.
Do you think life exists on Mars?
I don't know. I think there's a good chance it did exist at one time, based on what we're seeing, and that's why we want to go there. It's the closest one for us to see. Europa, which is a moon of Jupiter, is another place that strikes quite a bit of interest based on what we're seeing from our sensors on our spacecraft. I think, I don't know if there's life now, but what we want to know is, was there life there, and could it have had life for a while? Mainly because it could be for us, it could be a predictor of what could happen here. Not anytime soon, but over time, what do you need to go do? And we like to say we'd like to be smarter than the dinosaurs. Maybe figure out what we can do here to take care of Earth. But the indications are that there potentially was life at one time. It may not be life as we think about life, like people, but we think the basics for life are there, and that's why we want to get there and get more. It's tough with just one rover, right? It's almost like a one-of-one sample, so that makes it kind of hard. You had a question?
Yeah, how this will modulate or influence the course of the future of the human race, the Mars missions and human on Mars?
Well,
it's like the space era now changed our perspective of the world.
Yeah, I'd give you my personal view, right? I don't know if the agency has a view on that. I think from our perspective, or from my perspective, the reason for this journey, the reason we want to go do this is we could be we could be using up all our resources here, right? I think we are. We don't know how quickly that is. We have no idea. And so we may have to have another home one day, right? And so this is an opportunity for us to figure out, that's not tomorrow, that's probably not 100 years, it may be 200 years, whatever. So we need to start figuring out how we could live, because if I can live on Mars, if I can actually get to living on Mars, maybe I can live on Earth if something bad happens here. Same system's going to be applicable there. So it may sound a little cheesy, but I think it's a survival of the human race kind of thing. But I also think it's in our DNA as explorers. I think everybody has this, we want to figure out what's next, right? And I think about, when I think about why I'm here, right? Why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I just absolutely love what I get to do on a daily basis. It's all about making the impossible possible, right? There's a lot of things that we've been told we can't do that we've done. On the NASA side and even on the commercial side. I mean, look at what SpaceX did when they landed their first stage. If you saw that here like a month ago, right? Lisa and I got to see that first stage. We got to go into the hangar right before they tested it again. That's pretty freaking awesome, right? There's a lot of people said that wasn't possible, right? And so that's, to me, that's always that challenge that we have, and I think taking on the hard challenges is where you learn the things you're going to need to go forward, whether it helps us here on Earth or not. You can take things that we did, the water systems on the International Space Station, right, that we use today. There's several of those being similar type things that we learned being deployed in Africa where they don't have clean water, and we're using those systems to provide clean water to people in Africa that don't have running water like we do, right? So I couldn't have predicted that was going to be a result when we did station, but yet that's kind of the things that happen as we move forward. Satellite technology we have up there is giving us such indication of drought areas. Where do we need to put water? Where do we need to put fertilizer? Where's the water table look like, right? Who'd have thought that was going to be the kind of things that we get that inform the decision makers in our world of what they need to do? I mean, we're making decisions every day with new buildings that we put in at NASA to get them away from the coast because of the potential sea level rise, right? Well, we wouldn't have been able to do that without the technology we put in place. So when I think about going to Mars, yes, going to Mars is what I want to go do, but the technologies and the challenges that we knock out along the way, man, that's exciting, right? It's exciting. It's going to be hard, but it's exciting, and I think that's what comes back to us here on Earth. All right, well, thank you. Thank you, guys.